I'm about to share everything I sewed for my dream summer wardrobe this year, and one of these projects completely changed how I think about my personal style. You'll see which projects were total wins, which ones taught me hard lessons, and the one crucial insight from each that'll transform your own sewing. I'm sharing these in order of success, with the project that's become my most worn piece of the entire season saved for last. Let me start with the Kari romper in white linen. Now, this one taught me a big lesson about my personal style. I chose the Seamwork Kari pattern because I have this vintage romper that I absolutely love wearing in summer. I thought I'd make another one. The Kari has this trapeze silhouette that looks like a dress in drapey fabrics with shoulder ties and pockets. I really like rompers because you can get all the comfort of a one piece, but the shorts make it feel more sporty and just more mobile than a dress does. Plus, those tie shoulders mean no closures to sew. For fabric, I was originally thinking about using a white rayon challis with pink rosebuds, but after getting some input from Haley, I realized it looked a little bit babyish. You know, rompers are already pretty youthful, and adding a really girly print to that was just not the move. So I went with a plain white linen that I already had in my stash. I think white linen pretty much always looks elegant, and sometimes you need something that's really simple to balance out a shape like this. As I started sewing the center seams, I thought some top stitching would look nice to give more detail and structure to such a plain fabric. I used my edge stitch foot and lengthened the stitch to 3.5 millimeters. It's easy to forget that you can add top stitching just about anywhere and get a slightly different look. It's just such an easy little detail. Of course, I accidentally sewed one pocket upside down after I'd already finished the edge, but you know what? It was only a 10-minute setback to rip it out and fix it. Do you ever make a silly mistake like this and just freak out a little bit? I used to do that a lot, but I've gotten so much better at just taking a deep breath, moving on, and fixing it. Sometimes the emotional toll of a mistake is way out of proportion to the actual time it takes to fix it. It's just not worth getting upset over, even if it's not a quick fix. The most time-consuming part was turning those straps. I used the needle and thread method, threading the needle through the strap dull end first. I find it really satisfying for some reason. I chose to top stitch the neckline and armholes rather than understitch to match the top stitching throughout. I decided to shorten the hem since I like shorter lengths and thought it would balance out all that volume. But that's when I ran into a problem I didn't anticipate. The pocket bags stuck out. See, even when it looks like pockets will fit just fine in a pattern when you lay it flat, you have to account for gravity. Once I put it on, of course the pocket bags collapse toward the floor and they're visibly poking out. But again, it's not a big deal. I just had to tack the bottom of each pocket to the hem so they wouldn't collapse and peek out the bottom of the shorts. Voila, fixed. This romper came out very light and breezy. Perfect for hot days when you don't want to feel anything against your skin. It's also great to throw on over a swimsuit for going to the river. But here's the thing, I don't think I needed to shorten it. Because there's so much volume in the shorts, the short length makes me feel a bit exposed. So I've mostly been wearing this around the house when it's really hot. And here's my biggest lesson from this project. I had a huge realization about my personal style. I love volume and loose shapes on other people, but I just feel better in things that have at least a little bit of waist definition. My favorite shapes are ones that skim the body and feel sleek without being tight. Going forward, I think I'm moving away from anything with tremendous volume, even though it's really comfortable in the summer. Next up is the Rey Bucket Hat in red. Now, if you need a little break from sewing clothing, this pattern is perfect. Wouldn't it be great to say you made your own hat? This reversible lined hat comes in 3 sizes and is perfect for scrap busting, which is exactly how I used it. I spend a lot of time outdoors in summer. I wanted something to protect my face and neck while gardening or taking long walks with the dogs. Since this hat is reversible, I needed 2 fabrics. I love wearing red in summer, so I used leftover Liberty Lawn for my sage blouse. You might remember that from my winter sewing videos. For the other side, I found some tomato red heavy cotton poplin. I decided to add contrasting white top stitching on the solid side. I used a top stitching thread for that, which is heavier and more visible than an all-purpose thread. To choose my size, I measured my head. I thought I'd be a small, but at 23 inches, I'm actually a medium. I once had a massage therapist tell me that I had a small head, and I've kind of felt self-conscious about it ever since. Seriously, she even asked me if I had to shop in the kids department for hats. Isn't that rude? And then it turns out my head is pretty average. Anyway, I used woven fusible interfacing for the brim, something that would provide body and stiffness without being too bulky. And it worked pretty well. I always advise sampling some different interfacings with your fabric to get the amount of stiffness you really want. One of the trickier parts is sewing those curves when you stitch the hat band to the top circle. I made sure to clip the curves before stitching to get everything aligned. I tried it on at this point and it looked like a little fez. Another thing that's helpful is a tailor's hand for pressing those curves. There are lots of curves and circles with a hat like this, and a little extra TLC at the pressing station does wonders. The whole thing took about an hour and 15 minutes after cutting out. Super fast and fun to sew. Now, I knew I wanted to add ties because I like being able to take a hat like this off and hang it from my neck. But since the hat is reversible, what's the best way to attach ties that work on both sides? I thought about this for a while and considered a few options. I decided to add stitched eyelets at the sides, then make 2 ties that I could thread through and tie at both ends. So the hat would have a little bow at the back and then be tied under my chin. I tried sewing eyelets on scraps with top stitching thread first. They looked pretty bad from the wrong side. That's because of the difference between the thicker thread in the needle and the lighter thread in the bobbin. I switched to regular polyester all-purpose thread and they look much better on both sides. For the ties, I cut 1-inch strips of the Liberty fabric and used a bias tape maker for folding and pressing, then top stitched to create the ties. This hat is absolutely adorable and really works to keep the sun out of my face. I wasn't sure if I'd like a bucket hat, but the color and fabric make all the difference. My biggest lesson here, take the time to test. Figuring out what works and what doesn't is half the fun of sewing. Instead of rushing to finish, enjoy the process of problem solving creatively and deciding which tools and techniques really help you achieve your vision. Before I move on to the next summer project, I want to show you another piece I made previously that I wear all the time, my Joss pants in rayon challis. This summer, you can download the Joss pattern for free. This easy pattern can be made in everything from breezy linen to elegant silk. The simple wide leg pull-on style with an elastic waist is comfortable all year round and perfect to layer with sweaters once the weather cools off. I'll put the link in the description below so you can grab yours for free. Now let's talk about my Liberty Fern blouse. The Fern is a stylish raglan sleeve blouse with a gathered neckline, band collar, and these gorgeous staggered buttons. I absolutely love this pattern and was so excited to make it. I wear tops like this quite a lot, and this one has really pretty details that I knew would make it a tried and true pattern for me. I love the idea of making this in red and white, and when I saw this Liberty Tonalon on the B&J Fabrics website, I fell in love. I also wanted to add some solid piping, so I used leftover red linen scraps from our studio. Since the print is directional, I made sure to cut everything in one direction. Sometimes directional prints aren't obvious, and I hadn't even realized this print was directional until I was about to cut it. I used that red linen to make bias tape, folding it just once to create flat piping. But then I ran into a problem. I realized the placket is folded at the center front, so I couldn't add piping there. I hadn't thought about this. So I recut one piece in 2 parts, added a seam allowance, and sewed piping down the center. Even when you give your projects plenty of forethought, from time to time you're bound to run into issues like this that you hadn't considered. Again, that's why being willing to solve problems creatively is such a key skill in sewing. When making the neckband, I basted the piping to the outer neckband before attaching it. I made sure to try it on in each stage to see how it was progressing. I had just enough piping left for the sleeve bands. For the sleeves, I sewed the piping in a circle first, then the binding, then basted them together. The reason is, I didn't want the piping caught in the seam where I couldn't press it toward the sleeve. With trim and piping, always think about which way you want to press it. This blouse is just gorgeous. The fabric is really impactful and the piping is subtle, but it adds such a thoughtful touch. The piping is actually more subtle than I imagined it would be. I'm really glad I added it in. Here's what I learned. If you find a fabric you're absolutely in love with, pair it with a pattern that'll really let it shine and sew it sooner rather than later. I had this fabric saved on Pinterest for months and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Even though it was a splurge, I'm so glad I bought it and sewed something special right away instead of letting it languish in my stash. I have other fabrics I've been in love with but didn't have a plan for, and they've remained in my stash for months or even years. Once again, that's the power of planning and designing. And by the way, if you're interested in the process I use to design and sew my wardrobe each season, I'll put a link to that in the description too. It's a big part of our holistic approach to sewing at Seamwork. Finally, my absolute favorite of the season, the lilac dress in polka dots. I chose the bonus version of this dress, which is sleeveless and has a sweetheart neckline rather than a V-neck. This slim cut midi dress features underbust seams with gentle gathers and princess seam construction. I love the vintage style of this dress, and I especially love that it's body skimming. It's not tight at all, so it's still comfortable, but it shows the contours of my body. I used rayon challis in black with white polka dots. Rayon challis is so nice and cool in summer with lovely drape for a dress like this. And I'm just really into dots right now. Such a classic print. I decided I wanted more buttons before I started sewing. I really like the look of lots of buttons with button loops, so I drew in button marks between each existing one, essentially doubling the number. Now, because of the sweetheart neckline, I wanted to make sure there was no stressing or fraying. I reinforced the corner stress points of the neckline with tiny squares of interfacing to prevent fraying or pop seams later. One thing I often do is chain pieces when stitching, then cut the threads between. I did this with the stay stitching on the 4 bodice fronts, for example. It's a little trick I picked up from quilters. There were parts where I had to sew opposing curves, so I clipped into the seam allowance and used lots of pins. At one point, I realized I had many steps left and I started to feel a little overwhelmed. I decided not to put a deadline on it and just work a couple hours at a time. This made the process so much less stressful. I made my own bias tape using the continuous bias tape method since I knew I'd need more for button loops. I sewed the tube for the loops using a narrow zigzag, the 2mm length and 1.5mm width for stretch and to prevent fraying. I then used the needle and thread method to turn them. Really satisfying. I attached the loops with Wonder Tape, which worked beautifully. When I tried the dress on at this point, I was really excited about how it looked. I was planning covered buttons, but I didn't have enough. I thought I had enough, but I only had 20. I decided these shell buttons from my stash would actually look better because you can really see them. Covered buttons wouldn't be very visible in a black dress anyway. I used Wonder Tape to stick them in place before stitching. The buttons stayed securely in place the entire time. I highly recommend this trick. I am absolutely in love with this dress, and it's been one of my most worn pieces this summer. I love that it has a vintage, classic style, yet it's light and comfortable for everyday wear. I think I'll be able to wear it in fall with tights and a cardigan too, so it's super versatile. This dress wasn't fast or easy to sew, but the construction is beautiful and I love the result. My biggest lesson, taking time to make something I'll really cherish and wear all the time is worth the effort. I consciously tried to slow down and avoid rushing because I wanted to enjoy making something special. Another interesting thing is how much I've learned about my personal style and how it's evolving. The Kari Romper showed me that billowy, voluminous pieces without waist definition aren't really working for me right now. And the Lilac dress proved that even more because I love the sleek, body skimming shape. It shows you can learn so much about your style from both wins and misses if you just spend time reflecting. Nothing is wasted. You always learn something about yourself when you're sewing. If you're curious about what I'm planning to sew next, I'm already deep into planning my fall wardrobe, and I think you'll love seeing how I approach seasonal sewing planning. If you want to see how I plan the wardrobe I just showed you, and exactly how I choose patterns that work together and create a cohesive wardrobe, watch this video next.